Yes, I was the one. My name is John Cole, a retired general, and it was my hand that threw the first Bible onto the bonfire. It was my combat boot, still caked with the dust of the training grounds, that kicked over the wooden figure of a suffering Christ, its crown of thorns splintering on the cold stone of the town square, before I tossed it into the flames. And it was my voice, raw and torn with a grief that had hollowed me out, that roared over the stifled sobs of the faithful and the defiant glare of the town pastor. I looked at their faces, twisted in horror and disbelief, and I screamed the poison that had filled my soul. She saves no one. I'm 62 years old now. But to understand the man who would build a pyre for God in the center of his own town, you have to understand the man I was before. I was forged in discipline, shaped by the unyielding logic of war. In my world, there was order, there was strategy, and there were results. You trained, you fought, you won or you lost. It was all a matter of cause and effect. Faith. Faith was a variable I couldn't quantify. It was a weakness, a crutch for those who couldn't face the cold, hard facts of existence. And for most of my life, I tolerated it in others as a quaint, harmless delusion. Especially in my beloved wife, Eleanor. Her faith was the gentlest thing about her, a quiet, luminous presence in our home. I didn't understand it, but I loved her, so I let it be. I'd watch her at night, her fingers tracing the beads of a rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer before a small, plaster statue of the Virgin Mary she kept on her nightstand. Our Lady of Sorrows, she called it. I saw no sorrow in its painted face, only an unnerving serenity that I couldn't comprehend. Before I continue with this story, with the fire and the breaking and the darkness that followed, I want to ask you for something. If what I'm saying already touches a nerve, if you've ever felt lost or angry at the silence of the heavens, then please take a moment to subscribe to this channel and like this video. It helps this story reach others who might be wrestling with the same shadows. And please hit that notification bell so you don't miss how this story ends. It's important to me. And one more thing, if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me what city or state you're watching from. It helps me to know that I'm not just shouting into the void, that there are real people out there listening. Thank you. My war with heaven began the day the doctors gave Eleanor her diagnosis. It was a long, cruel illness, a siege laid against the woman who was my entire world. And through it all, her faith never wavered. If anything, it grew stronger, more radiant. Her nightly prayers became longer, her grip on that rosary tighter. She prayed to Mary, she told me, a mother who understood a mother's pain. But I saw no understanding. I saw only suffering. I saw a brilliant, vibrant woman slowly erased, her body betraying her while her spirit clung to a promise I believed was a beautiful, tragic lie. I blamed her God. I blamed the serene, plaster face on her nightstand. Every prayer she uttered was, to my ears, a testament to a divine indifference that was more cruel than outright malice. When she finally passed, the silence she left behind was deafening. It was a void, and into that void poured all my discipline, all my strategic thinking, twisted and curdled into a singular burning mission. I would tear that false hope out of this town, root and stem. The Great Burning, as they call it now, was my declaration of war. I used my reputation, the authority I still carried as General Cole, to rally a few angry, disenfranchised men and organize what I called a purging of superstition. We would cleanse the town of its idols. The day itself is a blur of cold fury. I remember my younger sister, Sarah, a woman of quiet, steady faith, much like Eleanor's, grabbing my arm, her face stained with tears. "John, please, She begged, "Don't do this. This isn't you. This is just your pain speaking." I shook her off. Pain was a fire, and I had decided to let it burn everything down. I remember the young evangelical preacher, David, a man whose fervent zeal I'd always despised, standing his ground before my men. He wasn't a Catholic, he had no love for statues, but he saw the hate in my eyes. He stood there, quoting scripture like a shield, his voice trembling but unbroken. "Vengeance is mine, says the Lord," he declared. I laughed in his face. His Lord had stood by and done nothing. Now it was my turn. The breaking point, the moment my rage became something monstrous, came when they brought out the main statue from St. Jude's. It was a life-sized version of the one Eleanor kept by her bed, Our Lady of Sorrows. Her head was tilted, her hands clasped, that same placid, unbearable expression on her face. As they carried it toward my bonfire, I saw Eleanor. I saw her in her final days, her face etched with pain, but her eyes still full of that infuriating, unshakable hope. It was a final, desperate act of grief and contempt. I shoved past my own men, ripped the heavy plaster statue from the hands of the parishioners, and with a roar that came from the deepest, most broken part of my soul, I hurled it onto the stone steps of the church. The sound, the sharp, hollow crack of plaster and porcelain, shattering into 100 pieces. It echoed the sound of my own heart breaking for the last and final time. The fire roared, consuming the Bibles and the crosses. But all I could see were the white, jagged shards of that broken face scattered on the steps like fallen stars. After the fire, there was no victory parade, no sense of triumph. I had expected to feel something, vindicated, free. Instead, the silence that fell over the town was a heavier condemnation than any sermon. It was a silence that followed me home, that filled the empty rooms of the house Eleanor had made a sanctuary. The war was over, but the enemy hadn't been some distant god. The enemy was the quiet. It was in the faint scent of her lavender soap that still lingered in the bathroom. It was in the indentation on her side of the bed that my own weight could never seem to smooth out. I had burned the symbols of her faith, but her ghost, gentle and unwavering, remained. My house became my bunker. The townspeople, once respectful, now crossed the street to avoid me. Their eyes held not anger, but a kind of deep, sorrowful pity that was far worse than hatred. It was the look you give a man who has lost his mind. My sister, Sarah, still called. She'd leave groceries on the porch, refusing to be pushed away entirely. "I'm praying for you, John," she'd say through the closed door. Her words were like salt on a wound. I'd just stand there, on the other side of the wood, clenching my fists until my knuckles were white, waiting for the sound of her car to fade away. I tried to impose my old order on the chaos. I woke at 050 hours, just as I had for 40 years. I made my coffee, read the papers, and maintained my physical fitness regimen with a grim, punishing intensity. Push-ups until my arms screamed. Miles on the treadmill going nowhere. It was all motion, no direction. I was a general with no army, no war to plan, no objective to secure. The strategist in me, the part that saw the world as a chessboard of predictable moves, was useless against the suffocating fog of my grief. At night, the images came, not of battlefields or fallen soldiers, but of the Virgin's face, shattered on the stone. The clean, white break in the plaster, and it would morph, twisting in the darkness of my room, into Eleanor's face in her last moments pale, tired, but peaceful. That infuriating peace. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs, the roar of the bonfire still ringing in my ears. I had waged my war, and my only captive was myself. The collapse came on a Tuesday. It was unremarkable. Grey, cold. I was standing in the kitchen, waiting for the coffee to brew, staring out the window at the bleak November sky. And then it started. A dull ache in my chest. Indigestion, I told myself. A pulled muscle from my workout. I was General John Cole. My body was a machine, a tool I had mastered. It followed orders. But this was different. This was a mutiny. The ache sharpened, tightened. A band of steel was being ratcheted around my ribs. A pain, white-hot and absolute, shot down my left arm, and my fingers went numb. My breath hitched. The military mind kicked in, a frantic, useless checklist. Asterisk, assess the situation. Identify the threat. Asterisk, the threat was inside me. Control your breathing. I couldn't, I was gasping, sucking in air that did nothing. My legs gave out, and I slid down the kitchen cabinets. The ceramic tile cold against my back. The coffee maker gurgled, finishing its cycle, a stupidly domestic sound in the middle of my world ending. Lying there, on the floor of the kitchen where Eleanor and I had danced to old records, I felt a new kind of terror. It wasn't the fear of battle, the clean, sharp fear of a known enemy. This was the terror of utter helplessness. My voice, which had commanded battalions, couldn't manage more than a choked whisper. My body, which I had honed into a weapon, had betrayed me. I was alone, utterly and completely alone. No one would find me for hours, maybe days. In that moment, I didn't think of tactics or strategies. I thought of the silence. The vast, cosmic silence I had railed against, and I felt it. I felt it as a physical presence in the room, a cold, indifferent void. I tried to summon my rage, my defiant pride. I tried to spit one last curse at the empty heavens. But all that came out was a gasp. The pain was immense, a crushing weight, but beneath it was something worse. The horrifying, bone-deep certainty that I was about to die, and that my death would be as meaningless as the ashes in the town square. The great General Cole, vanquished by a blocked artery, alone on his kitchen floor. It was a pathetic, ignominious end. As my vision started to tunnel, the edges turning grey and then black, the last image that bloomed in my mind was her face. The broken statue, Our Lady of Sorrows. Her shattered, plaster gaze meeting mine across an ocean of pain, silent and serene. And in that darkness, I thought it was the end. I was so sure of it. If you want to know what happened next, what I found in that darkness, please, make sure you've liked this video and that you've turned on notifications. You won't want to miss the part of the story where everything changes. The blackness that rushed in wasn't an absence of light, it was a substance. It was thick, cold, and heavy, pressing down on me, filling my lungs where air should have been. My entire life, I had been a commander of men, a master of strategy, an architect of control. And in my final moments, I had no control at all. The general was gone. All that was left was a terrified old man, dying alone on his kitchen floor, his heart a traitor in his own chest. The last coherent thought I had was one of bitter, cosmic irony. I had declared war on heaven. And in the end, I was being snuffed out by a simple plumbing problem in my own body. There was no glory, no final stand, just a pathetic, gurgling end. And then, the darkness took me completely. But it wasn't the end. It wasn't a void. The darkness changed. The cold, crushing pressure began to recede, replaced by a stillness I had never known. It was not the silence of an empty house, but the silence of a cathedral at midnight, a silence that was full, expectant. There was no pain, my heart wasn't hammering, my arm didn't ache. I had no body at all, and yet I was more present, more aware than I had ever been in my life. And in that profound stillness, I heard a sound. It was faint at first, a soft, rhythmic clicking. Asterisk, click, 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 asterisk, the sound of wood on wood. It was the sound of Eleanor's rosary beads slipping through her fingers in the lamplight of our bedroom. A sound I had dismissed for decades as a meaningless ritual. Now, it was the only thing that existed in the universe. Then, I saw it. Not with my eyes, because I had none, but with the core of my being. The shattered pieces of the statue, they were floating in the darkness before me, a constellation of broken plaster, the jagged white edges, the chips of blue from her mantle, the splintered hand I had broken off with my own fury. I saw them, and for the first time, I felt the full, unadulterated weight of what I had done. It wasn't pride. It wasn't defiance. It was a shame so deep, so absolute, it felt like it could unmake me. I had taken an image of a mother's sorrow and I had shattered it out of my own selfish rage. I had desecrated the one thing that had given my wife comfort in her own agony. The weight of that sin was unbearable. I expected to be condemned, to be cast out, to be annihilated by the sheer force of my own sacrilege. But that's not what happened. As I watched, paralyzed by my own shame, the pieces began to move. Slowly, gently, they drifted toward each other. The sound of the clicking beads grew stronger, more insistent, a quiet rhythm guiding the broken parts. A shard of the face found its place next to another. A piece of the veil settled into position. They weren't magically fusing back together. The cracks were still there. The fractures were visible, like a web of dark veins running through the plaster. It wasn't being made new. It was being made whole again, with its wounds. And as the face of Our Lady of Sorrows reformed before me, her expression was not one of condemnation. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even pity. It was the same serene, unbearable sorrow. But now, I didn't see indifference in it. I saw recognition. She was looking at me, and her sorrow was not for her own brokenness, but for mine. In that moment, I felt a presence envelop me. It was not a voice or a touch, but a feeling of being held. A feeling of mercy so profound and undeserved that it broke through the armor I had spent a lifetime building. I, John Cole, the destroyer, the blasphemer, was being held in the heart of the very thing I had tried to destroy. And I wept, not with my eyes, but with my soul. A sudden, violent thunder shattered the peace. Boom, boom, boom. It was a sound from another world, a brutal intrusion. The vision dissolved. The darkness swarmed back, but this time it was different. It was the fuzzy, grey darkness of returning consciousness. The pain in my chest was back, a roaring fire. The cold of the tile floor seeped into my bones. The thunder came again. Boom, boom, boom. It was my front door. Someone was pounding on my front door. A voice, thin and terrified, cut through the haze. John, John, are you in there? Open the door. I know you're in there. It was Sarah, my sister. How did she know? Why was she here? I tried to call out, but my throat was useless. The pounding became more frantic, and then I heard the splintering crash of wood. She had broken the door down. Her footsteps thundered through the house. John, and then she was there. Her face a mask of terror above me. The world swam. I saw her hand fly to her mouth, her other fumbling for her phone. I heard her screaming my name, screaming an address. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me again was the look in her eyes. Not the look of a sister finding her disgraced brother, but the look of someone terrified of losing the person they loved. When I woke up, the world was white. The ceiling, the sheets, the rhythmic, sterile beep of a machine beside me. I was in a hospital, I was alive. I turned my head, the movement a colossal effort. Sarah was asleep in a chair beside the bed, her head slumped forward, her face etched with exhaustion. Her purse was on the floor beside her, and hanging from the strap, catching the low light of the room, was a simple wooden rosary. As I looked at it, a memory, sharp and impossibly clear, surfaced from the haze of the vision. The soft, rhythmic sound, asterisk, click, 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 asterisk, it wasn't just a memory of Eleanor. It was the sound from the darkness, it was real. Sarah stirred, her eyes fluttering open. They found mine, and flooded with relief. She rushed to my side, her hand gently taking mine. It was frail, but warm. "John," she whispered, tears welling. "You're back. Oh, thank God, you're back." I couldn't speak. I could only look at her, at the rosary hanging from her purse, and then back at her face. My war was over. I had lost in the most absolute way imaginable. But a new journey, one I never could have predicted, was just beginning. If you want to see where that journey led, what it means to rebuild a soul from the ground up, please make sure you've liked this video and hit that notification bell. The hardest part, I would soon discover, was yet to come. The first days in the hospital were a campaign fought in the quiet theater of my own mind. My body was a field of surrender tethered to machines, monitored by nurses who spoke in soft, reassuring tones I didn't deserve. But my mind was a battlefield. The strategist in me, the part that had been dormant since Eleanor's death, roared back to life with a desperate mission: to analyze and neutralize the events on my kitchen floor. The vision? It was the primary threat to the entire structure of my reality. I marshaled my arguments like battalions. It was hypoxia, a lack of oxygen to the brain. A common phenomenon in cardiac arrest patients. The brain, in its final frantic moments, creates a cascade of comforting or familiar images. It had seized upon the most recent trauma, the broken statue, and played it back in a distorted, nonsensical loop. It was a chemical reaction, nothing more. A hallucination. I would lie there in the sterile white room, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor, and I would repeat this to myself like a mantra. Asterisk, hypoxia. A dying brain's fantasy. Coincidence. Asterisk, Sarah's arrival. She had a feeling, she said. A sudden, overwhelming urge to check on me. Coincidence, I countered. She was worried. She knew I was in a dark place. It was a logical conclusion for her to come check on me after I hadn't answered her calls. It was all explainable. Every piece could be filed away into a neat, rational box. I had spent my life believing in cause and effect, in things that could be measured and proven. A vision of a reassembling statue held by a feeling of mercy did not fit into that equation. Therefore, it had to be false. A phantom, a ghost in the machine of my failing body. But the phantom wouldn't leave. At night, when the hospital quieted down and the only light was the faint glow from the hallway, the sound would come back. Asterisk, click, 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 dot, asterisk, the soft, rhythmic sound of rosary beads. I'd snap my eyes open, my heart rate jumping on the monitor, and scan the darkened room. Nothing, just the shadows and the silence. But I had heard it. It was as real as the forward drip in my arm. Was I going mad? Was the damage to my heart more extensive, reaching into my mind? And the image of the reformed statue? It wasn't a memory of a dream anymore. It was a presence. I would close my eyes and see the web of cracks, the dark lines of its brokenness that were not erased but integrated. It wasn't a vision of perfection. It was a vision of a wound being made whole. And in its sorrowful eyes, I saw my own reflection. A broken, shattered old man. The shame was a slow, rising tide. It started as a discomfort, a squirming in my gut, whenever Sarah would sit by my bed and read her own rosary, sometimes slipping from her pocket. Then it grew. I would remember things I hadn't thought of in years. The way I'd smirk when Eleanor would say she was praying for a friend. The time I'd referred to her little statue as the plaster doll. I remembered seeing a young woman making the sign of the cross before a meal in a restaurant and muttering to my wife, "Look at that superstitious nonsense." Each memory was a shard of glass working its way to the surface of my soul. I, who had prided myself on honor and integrity, had been cruel. One had been a bully. I had mocked the deepest source of comfort for the woman I loved, and I had done it out of sheer, arrogant pride. The bonfire wasn't a singular act of madness. It was the culmination of a lifetime of contempt. The weight of it all was suffocating. The man in that hospital bed was a stranger to me, a small, petty, and profoundly foolish man. A few days before I was to be discharged, Sarah brought in a small bag of my things from home. A book, a change of clothes, my reading glasses. As she was leaving, she paused. She reached into her purse and pulled out her own rosary, the simple, dark wood one. She didn't say a word. She just laid it on the bedside table next to my water pitcher and squeezed my hand. Then she left. I stared at it for what felt like an hour. It was an enemy object, a symbol of the weakness I had despised. My hand, the same hand that had thrown a Bible into a fire, trembled as I reached for it. The beads were worn smooth, the small metal crucifix cool against my palm. I brought it closer. I saw the tiny, sculpted body of Christ, a figure I had kicked and burned. I felt the grain of the wood under my thumb, the same wood Eleanor's had been made of. And in the silence of that hospital room, the battle in my mind ceased. The strategist finally laid down his arms. There were no more arguments, no more rationalizations. There was only the weight of this object in my hand and the immensity of my shame in my heart. My throat tightened. The pride that had been my armor for 62 years crumbled into dust. I wasn't General John Cole. I was just John, a broken man who had destroyed something beautiful because he was in pain. I closed my hand around the crucifix, the metal pressing into my skin, and for the first time since I was a small boy, I tried to pray. The words wouldn't come. My mind was a blank slate, scrubbed clean of any formal prayers I might have once known. So I just held on, and in the utter silence of my soul, I formed a single, desperate thought aimed at the presence I had felt in the darkness, at the face of the sorrowful mother I had shattered. Asterisk, help me. I don't know what I'm doing. Please, help me. Asterisk, it was not a demand. It was not a negotiation. It was the unconditional surrender of a defeated soldier. And in that surrender, for the first time since Eleanor was gone, I felt a flicker, not of peace, but of possibility. If you've ever felt that kind of brokenness, if you've ever reached a point where your own strength just wasn't enough, please take a second to like this video and hit that notification bell. You'll want to see what happens when a man like me tries to learn how to walk in a world he once tried to burn down. Going home from the hospital was like returning to a foreign country that just happened to be my own house. The same chairs, the same pictures on the wall, the same faint scent of Eleanor's lavender that clung to the curtains. But I was seeing it all through new eyes. I was an exile in my own life. The silence I had once raged against was still there, but it wasn't empty anymore. It felt watchful, expectant. The first thing I did when Sarah dropped me off was walk into the bedroom and pick up the small, plaster statue of Our Lady of Sorrows from Eleanor's nightstand, the one I had spared, the one I had called a plaster doll. My hand trembled as I traced the lines of her face. I had despised this object. Now, it felt like an anchor in a world that had come completely unhoored. Word travels fast in a small town, especially a story like mine. The disgraced general, the man who built a bonfire for God, collapses from a heart attack and wakes up. Changed, it became a wildfire of whispers, a new town legend. And the reactions were exactly what the old me would have predicted, and even respected. To some, I was a joke. The old soldier who finally cracked under pressure. Grief does strange things to a man. I'd hear people mutter at the grocery store, their voices laced with pity. To others, I was a cautionary tale, a man whose mind had been broken by his own hate. The most charitable diagnosis was trauma-induced hallucination. My old military colleagues, the few who still spoke to me, tried to reason with me. "John, it was hypoxia," one of them said over the phone, his voice patient, as if explaining tactics to a raw recruit. The brain was starved of oxygen. It created a fantasy to protect itself. Its textbook. They were all presenting me with the very arguments I had first used on myself. They were trying to build the walls of my old fortress back up around me, to give me back the comfort of a world that made logical sense. But I couldn't go back inside. I remembered their scorn, their dismissal of faith as a crutch. Some were even more direct, accusing me of manufacturing the story as a ploy for sympathy. A way to get back into the town's good graces. He burned our Bibles, and now he wants us to believe he saw the Virgin Mary. A woman spat at me outside the post office. It's a trick. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing. The old me would have met that anger with a firestorm of my own. I would have argued, debated, presented my case with cold, hard logic. But the new me, the man who had been held in that undeserved mercy, had no fight left in him. I wouldn't argue. I couldn't prove what I had seen. All I could say, all I needed to say, was the simple, unshakable truth. It was the most real experience of my life. My sister Sarah was my bridge back to the world. She brought me to her small prayer group, a handful of women who met in the church basement. I walked in there feeling like a monster, my hands still stained with the smoke of my sacrilege. They knew who I was. They had seen what I'd done. But they didn't look at me with judgment. They looked at me with a quiet, knowing compassion. They prayed with me, and slowly I began to walk the path of the faith I had once tried to obliterate. I started attending Mass at St. Jude's. The first time I stepped through those doors, the doors Sarah had broken down to save me, every head turned, the air was thick with tension. I walked past the empty pedestal where the statue had stood, a gaping wound in the heart of the sanctuary, and I felt a shame so profound it almost drove me to my knees. I sat in the last pew, an intruder in the house I had violated. But week after week, I kept coming back. The symbols I had mocked began to speak to me. The stained glass windows weren't just colored glass. They were stories of sacrifice and redemption. The smell of incense wasn't just smoke. It was the scent of prayers rising. The small flame of the sanctuary lamp was a constant, burning presence, a light that had never gone out, even when I had brought my darkness to its steps. The moment of truth came a few months later, at a town-wide service of reconciliation. The pastor from St. Jude's and the young evangelical preacher, David, had organized it together. It was held in the town square, on the very spot where I had built my bonfire. The whole town was there. When the pastor invited anyone who felt moved to speak, a force I couldn't name pushed me to my feet. A hush fell over the crowd as I walked to the microphone. I looked out at their faces, the people I had terrorized, the faith I had mocked. I saw Sarah, her eyes shining with tears. I saw David, his expression unreadable. I took a deep breath. "My name is John Cole," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "And I am the man who brought the fire to this town. I stood on this ground, and I committed an act of hate born from a grief I could not control. I desecrated your sacred books. I destroyed your holy images, and I shattered the heart of this community. There are no excuses for what I did. And tonight, I stand before all of you to ask for your forgiveness." I paused, my heart hammering. "I thought my war was with God," I continued, "but I was just a broken man, fighting his own pain. I ended up on my kitchen floor, my heart giving out, dying alone in the silence I had created. And in that darkness, I was shown something. I was shown the very thing I had destroyed. I saw the shattered Lady of Sorrows, and I saw her being made whole again. Not perfect. The cracks were still there. And I understood. She wasn't showing me her face. She was showing me my own soul. Shattered, but not beyond repair. Proud, but not beyond mercy." I looked directly at the crowd, at the men who had followed me, at the families who had wept. "What I'm trying to say is that the very thing I hated, the thing I tried to burn out of this world, was the only thing strong enough to reach into the ashes of my life and pull me out. It wasn't about changing religions. It was about my heart being changed. My pride was burned away, and in its place, I found a humility I never knew. My rebellion was broken, and I was given a faith I did not earn." I stepped back from the microphone, my testimony complete, feeling more exposed and more free than I had ever been in my life. "Before I go, I want to ask you something. If this story has resonated with that part of you that knows we are all broken and in need of grace, please do me the honor of liking this video and hitting that notification bell so you can continue this journey with me. My story is not over. In many ways, it has just begun. And one last thing, a request from the bottom of my changed heart. If you believe in the power of a second chance, if you have ever felt a mercy you didn't deserve, I want you to write 2 simple words in the comments below. He is merciful. Let's fill this space not with arguments, but with a testament to the grace that finds us all, even in the darkness. Thank you.